The plant stood near the stairwell window, in a chipped ceramic pot with a crack running along the side, just above the soil line, not enough to break, just enough to show time. It was one of those ordinary green things that most people pass without seeing, not decorative, not striking, just alive. A thin vine with small round leaves, growing in slow spirals down the side of the pot and sometimes reaching toward the light when the sun fell at a particular angle in late afternoon. It belonged to him. He lived on the third floor, the apartment at the end of the hall. She had never seen him bring the plant there. It had simply appeared one day on the windowsill between their doors, as though it had grown there on its own. At first, she didn't notice. Then she passed by and saw the dry, curling edge of one leaf, brittle and faintly yellow. The next morning, she brought a cup of water. She didn't do it as a gesture. She didn't think about what it might mean. She just poured, slowly, watching the soil darken, the water disappearing with the quiet sound of thirst being met. Then she left the empty cup on her own windowsill, beside a row of smooth stones she had collected from different cities over the years and never displayed to anyone. He wasn't home that week. She could tell, the door stayed closed, the doormat undisturbed, the silence unbroken. She passed the plant each day and watched it begin to lean again toward the light. A few new leaves opened. Nothing dramatic. Just life, unspoken. When he returned, she noticed the change not in sound but in the shift of the doormat, the faint smell of coffee in the morning, the outline of his shoes placed parallel to the wall. He didn't move the plant. Didn't water it either, at least not visibly. But it remained healthy. She wondered if he noticed. Wondered if he knew. The next time he left, a few weeks later, perhaps a short trip, perhaps habit, she did the same. Watered it. Checked the soil. Pulled off one leaf that had browned and dropped onto the floor. It became part of her rhythm. Not a responsibility. Not a kindness. Just a motion she repeated with care. They never spoke. She sometimes heard him, footsteps in the evening, the soft clink of glass, music through the wall too faint to identify. Once, she caught a glimpse of him locking his door in the morning, head turned slightly downward, keys in hand, face neither closed nor open. He didn't look up. Neither did she. but the plant remained. Between them. Alive. Tended. Not claimed. The plant changed slowly, the way all living things do when someone is watching but not interfering. Its leaves grew broader, darker, some curling toward the light, some resting along the rim of the pot like quiet hands folded together. She began to notice small shifts in its shape, not dramatic, not sudden, but enough to make her pause each time she passed by. Sometimes she would tilt the pot slightly, adjusting its position so the light touched it evenly. Other times she only stopped, looked, and continued on without a sound. He continued to leave. Never for long, never on a pattern she could trace with certainty, but often enough that she learned to recognize the signs, the silence beyond his door, the stillness of the hallway, the air somehow emptier, thinner in the absence. She never asked herself where he went. That was not part of it. The distance was necessary, not out of fear, not out of propriety, but because whatever existed between them depended on being just barely out of reach. The watering became part of her own life in ways she did not fully realize. She began measuring her mornings around the light in the stairwell, stepping outside just when the sun was low enough to warm the windowsill, the water still cool in the cup from the kitchen tap, her hand steady as she poured it slowly into the soil. She never overwatered. She never lingered. She never looked to see if the door behind her opened. Once, early in spring, she returned from a short trip of her own and found that the plant had been turned slightly to face the other direction. She hadn't done it. And the soil was damp. She said nothing. She didn't knock. She didn't write a note. But that evening, she passed by his door and paused for just a second longer than usual, enough to hear, very faintly, the sound of someone moving inside. And for the first time, she imagined that he, too, listened when the hallway was still, when the soft sounds of water reached the quiet space between their doors. they still never met. Never once crossed paths face to face. But the plant continued to grow.